The early morning sunlight streamed through the Venetian blinds, casting harsh shadows across our suburban kitchen. The tension in the air was electric, making it hard to breathe. My husband Marcus, a former Marine turned defense contractor, paced our linoleum floor like a caged animal, each heavy step echoing his mounting anger. The argument from last night about his sister Rebecca's latest emergency hung between us like a dark cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. Rebecca had shown up at our door yesterday evening, mascara streaking down her face, spinning another tale of urgent bills and threats from creditors. This time, she wanted my credit card, not just to borrow it, but to add herself as an authorized user. When I firmly refused, it triggered a chain reaction that ended with Marcus exploding in a way I hadn't seen since his worst PTSD episodes after returning from his third tour. I took a tentative sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid matching the atmosphere that had settled over our once peaceful home. Marcus's pacing intensified, his combat boots leaving scuff marks on the floor. Marks I would later have to scrub away, just like I'd been scrubbing away signs of his growing instability for months. "Rachel," he said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge I'd come to recognize. "We need to talk about this rationally." But there was nothing rational about the way his fists were clenched, or how the vein in his neck pulsed visibly beneath his faded USMC tattoo. I could feel his eyes boring into me, silently demanding that I change my mind. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. This had gone on far too long. The kitchen clock ticked away, each second amplifying the tension. Through the window, I could see our neighbors' kids waiting for the school bus, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside our house. How had we gotten here? Just 3 years ago, Marcus and I had been the picture of military family success. Him transitioning smoothly into civilian life with a prestigious defense contract job, me running my growing online graphic design business, and our beautiful, colonial-style house in a quiet Virginia suburb. But then Rebecca had entered the picture. Marcus's younger sister had always been troubled, bouncing between jobs and relationships, leaving a trail of financial disasters in her wake. At first, it was small things, borrowing money for rent, asking Marcus to co-sign for a car loan, needing help with utility bills. I'd supported Marcus's desire to help his only living family member, understanding how their shared childhood trauma and the loss of their parents had created an unbreakable bond. The requests grew larger, more frequent, and increasingly desperate. Credit card debt, gambling losses disguised as business investments, and now this latest scheme. Each time, Marcus would cave, drawing from our savings, maxing out his own cards, and eventually turning to mine. The war hero in him couldn't stand to see anyone suffering, especially his baby sister. But his helper's mentality had morphed into something darker, more obsessive. I watched him now, noting how his hand trembled slightly as he gripped the counter, a telltale sign of his anxiety medication wearing off. The morning sun caught his wedding ring, and I remembered the day he'd proposed just after returning from his second tour. He'd been different then, confident but gentle, strong but kind. The man before me now was a shadow of that person, twisted by guilt, PTSD, and his sister's manipulation. "Marcus," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to find another way to help Rebecca. Adding her to my credit card isn't the solution. She needs professional help, financial counseling, maybe therapy. We both know this isn't about money anymore." He stopped pacing abruptly, turning to face me with an intensity that made my breath catch. The morning light cast half his face in shadow, and for a moment, I saw the haunted look he'd worn after losing his best friend in Fallujah. "You don't understand, Rachel. She's all I have left from before everything. I promised our parents I'd take care of her." "But who's taking care of you?" "Of us?" I countered, feeling a sudden surge of courage. "Your sister's problems are destroying our marriage, draining our savings and triggering your PTSD. This isn't healthy for anyone. The muscle in his jaw twitched, and his eyes darted to the coffee mug in my hands. The rational part of me knew I should stop talking, but years of suppressed frustration were finally breaking free. We need to set boundaries, Marcus. I love you, but I won't watch you destroy yourself trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. My words hung in the air for a moment, and I saw something shift in Marcus's expression. The morning light caught the gray at his temples, premature aging from years of stress and trauma. His face flushed deep red, starting at his neck and creeping upward, a warning sign I'd learned to recognize during his worst episodes. You think you understand everything, don't you, Rachel? His voice was dangerously quiet, barely above a whisper. Sitting there in your comfortable little home office, designing pretty pictures all day, while I spent years dodging bullets and watching my brothers die. And now you want to lecture me about taking care of family? The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I'd seen this pattern before, how he weaponized his service when cornered, using his trauma as both shield and sword. The rational part of my mind urged me to back down, to de-escalate, but something inside me had finally snapped. Don't do that, Marcus. Don't use your service to justify enabling Rebecca's destruction. You're not on the battlefield anymore, and this isn't about saving lives. Your sister is manipulating you, playing on your protector instincts, and you're letting her destroy everything we've built together. He slammed his hand down on the granite countertop, the sound echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. Our wedding photo on the wall rattled in its frame, an image of happier times that now felt like a distant dream. Outside, I heard the school bus pull away, its diesel engine fading into the morning quiet, leaving us alone with our escalating tension. You're going to give Rebecca your credit card, he growled, his voice taking on that mechanical tone he used during flashbacks when he was somewhere between Virginia and Fallujah. She's coming here at noon, and you're going to hand it over with a smile on your face. Do you understand me, civilian? The word civilian hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't called me that since his first months back from deployment during the worst of his adjustment period. Back then, we'd worked through it together, with help from his VA counselor. But the Marcus standing before me now wasn't the man who'd been willing to accept help, to acknowledge his struggles. This was someone else entirely. No, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I won't do that, Marcus. I won't be complicit in this destructive cycle anymore. Rebecca needs real help, not another credit line to max out. And you need to talk to Dr. Harrison again. Your symptoms are getting worse and... I never finished that sentence. In one fluid motion, born from years of combat training, Marcus snatched his coffee mug from the counter and hurled it at my face. Time seemed to slow as I watched the dark liquid arc through the air, steam still rising from its surface. I managed to turn my head slightly, but not enough to avoid the scalding coffee that splashed across my right cheek and neck, seeping into my silk blouse, the one I'd bought for a client meeting later that day. The ceramic mug shattered against the wall behind me, fragments scattering across the kitchen floor like shrapnel. The sound triggered something in Marcus, and for a moment I saw confusion flash across his face, followed by horror. But it quickly hardened into something cold and distant, the same look he'd worn when describing combat operations he couldn't fully remember. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice eerily calm. "This is what happens when you don't follow orders, Rachel, when you don't understand the chain of command. Rebecca needs that credit card, and you're going to give it to her. Or maybe it's time for you to receive a dishonorable discharge from this marriage." I sat frozen, feeling the coffee burn against my skin, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the ringing in my ears. Coffee dripped steadily from the edge of the table, forming a puddle on the floor that mingled with the scattered ceramic shards. Pieces of our marriage breaking apart in real time. As the coffee continued to drip onto the floor, memories flooded my mind. illuminating a pattern I'd been too close to see. The signs had been there from the beginning, but like many military spouses, I'd mistaken control for strength, aggression for passion, and isolation for protection. I remembered our first year of marriage, right after Marcus returned from his second tour. He'd seemed so stable then, handling his transition to civilian life with remarkable grace. The defense contractor position had come easily. Companies were eager to hire decorated Marines with his expertise in logistics and security operations. We'd bought this house in this quiet Virginia suburb, believing we were living the American dream. The changes had been subtle at first. Marcus insisted I work from home instead of renting office space, claiming he worried about my safety in the city. He took control of our finances, explaining that his military training made him better at handling money. I'd accepted these changes, telling myself that his protective instincts came from seeing too much death, too much chaos in war zones. Then, Rebecca had appeared on our doorstep 18 months ago, clutching a duffel bag and sporting a black eye from her latest boyfriend. Marcus had transformed instantly from my somewhat overprotective husband into an avenging warrior. He'd driven to Philadelphia that same night, and though he never told me what happened to Rebecca's boyfriend, the charges were eventually dropped, and the man left the state. Rebecca had stayed with us for 3 months, and during that time, I watched my husband change. His hypervigilance intensified. He started missing his VA appointments, claiming he needed to be available in case his sister needed him. The nightmares returned, violent episodes that left our bedroom in disarray and my arms bruised from restraining him. But he refused to acknowledge the correlation between his deteriorating mental health and his sister's presence. Even after Rebecca moved into her own apartment, paid for with our savings, the situation only escalated. There were constant emergencies: unpaid rent, maxed-out credit cards, impounded cars, and mysterious men demanding money. Each crisis sent Marcus deeper into his protective warrior mode and further from the loving husband I'd married. I touched, my burning cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where the coffee had scalded my skin. In the hallway mirror, I could see the red splotches beginning to blister. The silk blouse I'd laid out for today's client meeting was ruined, coffee stains spreading across the ivory fabric like a Rorschach test of our dysfunction. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Rebecca. "On my way. Can't wait to sort this out. Marcus says you'll help. You're the best sister-in-law ever." The casual entitlement in her message made my stomach turn. She knew exactly what she was doing, how she was manipulating her brother's trauma responses and protective instincts. Every crisis, every tear-filled phone call, every dramatic appearance pushed Marcus closer to the edge, re-triggering the hypervigilance and savior complex that had kept him alive in combat, but was destroying him, destroying us, in civilian life. I heard Marcus in the garage, probably calling Rebecca to confirm my compliance. His voice drifted through the door, that strange combination of military precision and barely contained rage that had become his new normal. "Affirmative. Target secured. Situation under control." The military jargon increased with his stress levels, another warning sign I'd learned to recognize too late. Standing there in my coffee-soaked blouse, surrounded by shattered ceramic and broken trust, I thought about the promises we'd made to each other. Marcus had vowed to love and protect me. But somewhere along the way, protection had mutated into possession, and love had been replaced by control. I'd promised to stand by him through better or worse, but I never agreed to be a casualty of his unresolved trauma or his sister's manufactured emergencies. The garage door slammed, and Marcus's boots stomped down the hallway. I tensed instinctively, muscle memory from too many similar confrontations. As Marcus's footsteps grew closer, I found myself mentally calculating escape routes, another habit I'd developed over the past year. The front door was 15 steps away, but I'd have to pass him to reach it. The back door through the sunroom was closer, but the latch had been sticking since last winter. My car keys were in my purse by the entryway, but my phone was still on the counter, just out of reach. These tactical assessments felt foreign to me. I was a graphic designer, not a soldier. Yet here I was, analyzing my own home like a battlefield. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd absorbed more of Marcus's military mindset than I'd realized, but for entirely different reasons than he had. "Rebecca will be here in 30 minutes, Marcus announced, re-entering the kitchen. His voice had taken on that clipped, official tone he used when issuing what he considered orders. "That gives you exactly 20 minutes to clean yourself up and get your head straight about this situation." He surveyed the coffee-splattered wall and scattered ceramic shards with detached interest, as if viewing surveillance footage of someone else's life. I remained silent, my mind racing through options and consequences. If I gave Rebecca my credit card, it would buy me time, but at what cost? Our savings were already depleted from her last 3 emergencies. The graphic design business I'd built from scratch was finally gaining traction. But one authorized user with a spending problem could destroy everything I'd worked for. More importantly, capitulating now would set a dangerous precedent. One, that could cost me more than just my financial security. But refusing meant facing Marcus's escalating rage, and possibly worse. The coffee mug was just the latest in a series of thrown objects, a progression that had started with pillows during his nightmares, evolved to books during arguments, and now this. What would be next? The tactical knife he kept in his boot? The handgun he'd insisted we needed for home protection? "You're bleeding," Marcus observed flatly. I looked down to see a small cut on my hand, probably from one of the ceramic shards. The sight of blood seemed to trigger something in him. His expression softened slightly, that familiar flicker of the man I'd married breaking through the warrior facade. "Let me get the first aid kit." "Don't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, just don't." He froze, and I saw the conflict play across his face. Part of him, the part that had once been a caring husband, recognized the wrongness of our situation. But that part was increasingly overshadowed by the hyper-vigilant protector who saw threats everywhere and dealt with them through escalating force. "Rachel," he began, running his hands through his military short hair. "You're not seeing the bigger picture here. Rebecca needs protection. Financial security is tactical advantage in civilian life. Without it, she's vulnerable. Every predator out there can smell weakness, can exploit—" "Stop," I interrupted, surprising both of us. "Just stop turning everything into a military operation. Rebecca isn't a tactical objective. I'm not a subordinate to be commanded, and our marriage isn't a war zone, even though you're treating it like one." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth and accusation. I watched Marcus process them, saw the muscle in his jaw twitch as he fought between his instinct to assert control and his dwindling capacity for self-awareness. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, counting down the minutes until Rebecca's arrival, until I would have to make a decision that would change everything. In that moment of tense silence, I thought about the life I'd imagined for us, the children we'd planned to have, plans now indefinitely postponed because I couldn't bring a baby into this volatility. The design studio I'd dreamed of opening, dreams deferred because our resources were constantly diverted to Rebecca's endless crises. The peaceful retirement we'd talked about, traveling the country in an RV, now seeming as impossible as the happy marriage I'd once believed we had. The cut on my hand throbbed in sync with my racing heartbeat. 20 minutes to decide. Stay and surrender my financial independence, my security, my self-respect, or leave and face the unknown. Either way, I realized, I was at a point of no return. The woman who had walked into this kitchen this morning couldn't walk out unchanged. Time seemed to move differently as I dabbed at my coffee-stained blouse with a kitchen towel, each motion mechanical and deliberate. My mind, however, was racing, forming a plan that terrified and empowered me in equal measure. Years of living with a military strategist had taught me something about tactical planning, though I never imagined I'd use those lessons to escape my own marriage. First, I needed resources. My laptop bag was in my home office. Inside it, my backup credit cards and the thumb drive containing all my client files. The emergency cash I'd started hiding after Rebecca's last loan was taped behind the loose baseboard in our guest bathroom, a trick I'd learned from one of Marcus's stories about weapons caches in war zones. Passport and birth certificate were in the fire safe in our bedroom closet. Marcus insisted on keeping important documents secured military style. 15 minutes, Marcus announced, checking his watch, the same tactical timepiece he'd worn in combat. I expect you to be changed and ready when Rebecca arrives. We clear on the objective? I nodded mutely, my heart hammering against my ribs. The familiar phrase, clear on the objective, hit differently now. How many times had he used military language to control our civilian life? Even our arguments had become briefings, our disagreements treated like insubordination. I need to change, I said, gesturing at my ruined blouse. And clean up this mess. The coffee was starting to dry on the walls, leaving dark stains that looked unsettlingly like blood spatter. Marcus's eyes followed my gaze, and for a moment, I saw him flinch. Perhaps he was seeing different walls, different stains, memories of violence from another time and place. Affirmative, he replied, his voice distant. I'll secure the perimeter. Rebecca said she might have someone following her again. Probably another creditor. He moved to the window, assuming what I recognized as a defensive position, scanning the quiet suburban street like it was an enemy-held territory. I took advantage of his distraction to move toward our bedroom, forcing myself to walk normally, despite the urge to run. Inside, I went through the motions of changing my clothes while my mind raced through logistics. I had 3 freelance clients with outstanding invoices, money I could expedite if necessary. My friend Sarah from college had moved to Richmond last year and always said I could visit. We hadn't spoken much lately. Marcus had deemed her a security risk after she questioned the bruise on my arm at our last dinner together. Opening my closet, I pulled out a fresh blouse while silently noting which items I could fit in my laptop bag without arousing suspicion. A change of clothes, my mother's jewelry, the external hard drive with my portfolio. The fire safe key was where I always kept it, hidden in an old makeup compact. Marcus had insisted I memorize the combination. Backup access protocols are essential in crisis situations, but never thought to change the key's hiding place. My phone buzzed again. Rebecca. Almost there. Got great news about an investment opportunity too. Can't wait to tell you both. The fake enthusiasm made me nauseous. Every investment opportunity had been a scam or a gambling scheme, each one bleeding us drier than the last. I thought of my latest client project, rebranding a local women's shelter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could hear Marcus on the phone in the kitchen, likely coordinating with Rebecca. His voice had that clipped mission briefing tone. Approach from the north side. Park in the designated area. Maintain radio silence until contact. More military speak, turning our suburban home into a tactical operations center. The burn on my cheek throbbed as I applied concealer, muscle memory from countless other mornings covering countless other marks. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. When had I become this person? This frightened, calculating woman planning her escape like a military extraction. The graphic designer who once spent hours choosing the perfect shade of purple for a client's logo was now evaluating escape routes and cataloging assets. 10 minutes, Marcus called from the kitchen. Status report? Almost ready, I responded, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Years of managing difficult clients had taught me to project calm I didn't feel. I zipped my laptop bag, now slightly heavier with its concealed cargo, and took one last look around the bedroom. How many nights had I lain awake here, listening to Marcus's combat nightmares, telling myself things would get better if I just tried harder, loved more, understood deeper. The walls seemed to close in, years of memories pressing against me. Our wedding photo on the dresser, Marcus in his dress blues, me in white, both of us radiating hope for the future. The painting we'd bought on our first anniversary, before Rebecca, before the defense contractor job started triggering his PTSD, before civilian life became another war for him to fight. The dent in the wall by the door, hidden behind a framed certificate, from the night he'd thrown his phone after Rebecca called crying about another abusive boyfriend. I stepped out of the bedroom, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, a familiar enough sight that it wouldn't raise Marcus's suspicions. After all, I often worked from coffee shops when his hypervigilance became too suffocating. The weight of my hidden emergency supplies felt like armor, giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. "Vehicle approaching," Marcus announced from his position by the window, his posture rigid. "Black Honda Civic, 2 occupants. Rebecca's in the passenger seat." His hand instinctively moved to his hip where his sidearm would have been during deployment. The gesture sent a chill down my spine. My phone lit up with a new message, but not from Rebecca. It was from Linda, my client from the Women's Shelter Project. "Meeting still on for 11:30? Need to finalize the resource packet designs." I stared. At the message, an idea forming. Linda wasn't just a client. She was a former military spouse herself, and she'd given me her personal number, just in case. After noticing how I flinched when Marcus raised his voice during a chance encounter. At the grocery store. "Unknown male at the wheel." Marcus continued his surveillance report. "Potential hostile. Rachel, move to the designated safe room until I assess the situation." The safe room was our home office, reinforced after Marcus's second PTSD episode. The irony of him trying to secure my safety now, after throwing scalding coffee at me, was almost too much to bear. Instead of complying, I stepped into the kitchen and did something I hadn't done in months. I called Linda. Marcus was too focused on the approaching car to notice. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Rachel, is everything okay with the designs?" "The coffee's all wrong," I said, my voice trembling slightly. It was the code phrase Linda had insisted I memorize, part of the shelter's protocol for identifying women in crisis. There was a pause on the other end, then Linda's voice came back. All business. "Are you safe right now?" "No," I whispered. "But I will be. Can you meet me at the usual place in 30 minutes? For the design review?" "Of course," Linda replied smoothly. "I'll bring the whole team." Marcus's voice cut through the air. "Rachel, safe room now. Unknown subject is exhibiting suspicious behavior." The Honda had parked, and I could see Rebecca getting out, wearing designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly business expenses. The man behind the wheel remained seated, engine running. "I have to go," I told Linda. "But I'll see you soon." Ending the call, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm I imagined Marcus must have felt in combat, when the mission parameters were clear and all that mattered was execution. "That better have been a client call," Marcus said, finally turning from the window. "We're in lockdown." "Until I verify the situation." His eyes narrowed at my laptop bag. "You're not going anywhere until this is handled." The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension. Rebecca's voice filtered through, artificially bright. "Hey guys, open up! You won't believe the opportunity I found." I watched Marcus move to the door, noting how he checked the security camera first. A reasonable precaution turned obsessive ritual. Rebecca burst in as soon as the door opened, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and desperation. The man in the Honda revved his engine once, then pulled away. "Oh my God, you guys!" Rebecca gushed, dropping her designer bag on the counter, right in the coffee puddle I hadn't had a chance to clean up. "So listen, There's this amazing investment opportunity in crypto, but we have to act fast. My friend Tony, he's super connected, knows all the big players. He says we can triple our money in 2 weeks. Marcus's tactical focus shifted, but not in the way I expected. Instead of questioning this obvious scam, he turned to me with renewed intensity. This is why we need to move now. Time-sensitive mission parameters. Rachel, the credit card. I felt my phone buzz again in my pocket. Linda, probably confirming our extraction plan. The burn on my cheek throbbed, a reminder of what was at stake. Rebecca was still talking, spinning her web of promises and possibilities, while Marcus watched me with predator's eyes. The thing about Tony's crypto investment, Rebecca continued, pacing the kitchen in her designer heels, oblivious to the coffee stains and ceramic shards, is that it's totally exclusive. Members only. But he's willing to make an exception for us because of our special situation. She glanced meaningfully at Marcus, a silent reminder of whatever leverage she held over him from their troubled past. My phone buzzed again, this time with a series of rapid notifications. Linda had mobilized her network, a carefully constructed web of domestic violence advocates, legal professionals, and fellow survivors. Each message represented another piece of the safety net I hadn't known I needed until this moment. Rachel. Marcus's voice cut through Rebecca's sales pitch. The credit card, now. His fingers drummed against his thigh in that familiar pattern, the same rhythm he tapped out during his worst flashbacks. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats, the cadence of helicopter blades, he'd once told me. I reached for my purse, making a show of compliance while my mind raced through Linda's shelter protocols. The first 24 hours were crucial, she'd explained during our project meetings. Most domestic violence escalations happened when the abuser sensed they were losing control. Here's the thing, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to make a call first, to verify some funds. The partial truth felt strange on my tongue. I was usually terrible at lying, especially to Marcus. His military training had made him exceptionally good at detecting deception. Rebecca's face fell slightly. But Tony's waiting. The opportunity could disappear any minute. Her practiced desperation had an almost theatrical quality to it. In another life, she could have been an actress instead of a professional manipulator. Stand down, Rachel, Marcus ordered, taking a step toward me. This is not a negotiation. Execute the objective as commanded. His words were clipped, precise, the voice of a squad leader, not a husband, the same tone he'd used right before. Throwing the coffee. My phone buzzed again. Linda, team in position, green light. The message gave me courage I didn't know I had. No, I said quietly. The kitchen went silent. Even Rebecca stopped her nervous pacing. What did you say, civilian? Marcus's voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper. I said no. My voice grew stronger. I'm not giving you or Rebecca my credit card. Not now, not ever again. I took a step back, closer to the kitchen door. And I'm leaving. Marcus moved with military precision, but I'd anticipated this. 3 years of living with a tactical expert had taught me something about strategic positioning. The kitchen island was between us. Not much, but enough to give me a head start. You're not thinking clearly, he said, his hands flexing at his sides. You're emotionally compromised. Stand down and we can discuss this through proper channels. Rebecca chimed in, her voice taking on that manipulative whine I'd grown to hate. Rachel, please, you don't understand what's at stake here. Marcus, tell her about Mom and Dad. About what happened. Enough. The word escaped me with unexpected force. I don't want to hear any more stories, any more excuses, any more military commands masquerading as marriage. My hand found the doorknob behind me. I have a team too now, Marcus, and they're not going to let you hurt me anymore. As if on cue, car doors slammed outside. Multiple sets of footsteps approached the house. Marcus's head snapped toward the sound, his tactical training kicking in as he assessed the new threat. "Rachel," his voice had taken on a pleading edge. "Don't do this. Don't bring civilians into a military situation. You know I can't. I can't stand down when there's a threat to the unit. The only threat here is you," I said softly. "You and your inability to see that you've turned our marriage into a combat zone. I'm not your subordinate, Marcus. I'm not a mission objective, and I'm done being a casualty of your unresolved trauma." The front door opened, and Linda's voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Rachel, are you ready?" Marcus's military training kicked in instantly at the sound of unknown persons entering his secured perimeter. His body shifted into a defensive stance, eyes darting between me, the doorway, and the various tactical advantages our kitchen provided. Rebecca pressed herself against the counter, her designer bag clutched to her chest, all pretense of confidence evaporating in the face of actual conflict. "This is a breach of protocol," Marcus growled, his voice taking on that mechanical quality that signaled his deepest dissociation. "Unauthorized entry into a secured location during an active situation. Rachel, get to the safe room. Now." But Linda was already in the doorway, and she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Sarah Thompson, the VA social worker who'd worked with Marcus during his initial transition, and two uniformed police officers, one of whom I recognized as Jennifer Martinez, the domestic violence specialist who'd consulted on my shelter design project. "No one's going to any safe room, Master Sergeant Campbell," Sarah said calmly, using his former rank deliberately. "What we're going to do is take a tactical pause and assess the situation professionally." I watched Marcus struggle to reconcile the presence of his former counselor with the tactical threat his PTSD was screaming about. His hands clenched and unclenched, that familiar rhythm of helicopter blades tapping against his thigh. "This is a family matter," Rebecca interjected, finding her voice. "You have no right to interfere in a private—" "Ms. Campbell," Officer Martinez cut in, "I suggest you take a moment to observe your surroundings." She gestured to the coffee-stained walls, the scattered ceramic shards, the angry red burns, visible on my neck and cheek. This stopped being a private family matter when it became a domestic violence situation. The phrase, domestic violence, seemed to pierce Marcus's tactical fog. He blinked, looking around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time, the evidence of his loss of control scattered across our once peaceful home. I didn't. He started, then stopped. Rachel was resisting the mission parameters. The situation required immediate corrective action. Even as he said it, I could see him wrestling with the disparity between his military justification and the reality of what he'd done. "Master Sergeant," Sarah stepped forward, her voice professional but compassionate. "You're experiencing a severe PTSD episode, complicated by familial manipulation and enabling behaviors. Your combat training is interpreting domestic disagreements as tactical threats, and you're responding with escalating force. This is not a battlefield, and your wife is not an enemy combatant." Linda had moved to my side, her presence steady and grounding. "Rachel has burns that need medical attention," she said firmly. "She's coming with us now. You have two choices. Marcus, stand down voluntarily or Officer Martinez will ensure compliance." Rebecca, sensing the power dynamics shifting, tried one last manipulation. "Marcus, you can't let them do this. Remember what you promised Mom and Dad? Remember what we've been through? You're supposed to protect me." "Enough," Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "Ms. Campbell, your exploitation of your brother's PTSD and survivor's guilt ends now. You've systematically undermined his recovery for your own gain, triggering his trauma responses to maintain control. As his former counselor, I'm mandated to report this as harmful to his mental health." The kitchen, fell silent except for the steady drip of coffee from the counter to the floor. I watched Marcus's face as the reality of our situation finally seemed to break through his tactical mindset. His eyes focused on my burned cheek, then the coffee stains, then the shattered mug. Physical evidence he couldn't rationalize away with military protocol. "Oh God," he whispered, and for the first time since his last deployment, I saw tears in his eyes. "Rachel, I didn't mean." "I know," I said softly, and I did. The man I'd married was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of trauma, manipulation, and misplaced loyalty. But I couldn't sacrifice myself trying to dig him out. "But I can't be your collateral damage anymore." "We have a room waiting at the VA," Sarah said, addressing Marcus directly. "You need intensive trauma therapy, Master Sergeant, and distance from toxic influences." She glanced meaningfully at Rebecca, who had the grace to look ashamed. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Officer Martinez documented my injuries while Linda helped me pack an emergency bag. Rebecca was escorted from the premises after a failed attempt to take my credit cards from my purse during the confusion. Sarah stayed with Marcus, talking him through the process of voluntary admission to the VA's psychiatric unit. His final words to me before leaving, "I'm sorry, Rachel, I lost my bearings," echoed in my mind as Linda drove me to the emergency room. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on my burned skin as the doctor examined me. "Second-degree burns," she announced, applying a specialized cream. "They'll heal, but you may have some scarring." She hesitated, then added more, gently, "We see a lot of domestic violence victims here. It usually starts with throwing things." "I'm not a victim," I found myself saying. "Not anymore." The words felt strange, but true. The doctor smiled slightly as she finished bandaging my cheek. Linda had arranged for me to stay at a secure location, a small but comfortable apartment above a bookstore owned by another survivor. As we drove, there, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, nature's reminder that even the darkest days eventually end. "The security system is top-notch," Linda explained as we climbed the stairs. "Card key access, cameras, panic, buttons. Several of our clients have built successful new lives starting right here." She unlocked the door to reveal a space that, while modest, felt worlds away from the military precision of my former home. The apartment was furnished simply but thoughtfully. A comfortable couch, a small dining table, a desk perfectly sized for my laptop. Someone had placed a vase of fresh sunflowers on the windowsill, their bright faces turned toward the fading light. "Sarah will keep us updated on Marcus's treatment," Linda continued, showing me around. "But for now, focus on yourself. You've been in survival mode for so long, Rachel. It's time to remember who you are beyond that." I set my laptop bag down on the desk, my mobile design studio, now representing not just my business, but my independence. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Martinez. "Restraining order processed. Electronic copies in your email. Stay strong." Sitting on the edge of the bed, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day's events. The tears came suddenly, years of pent-up emotion breaking free. Linda sat beside me, offering silent support as I grieved. Not just for my marriage, but for the man Marcus had been before trauma and manipulation had twisted him into someone I no longer recognized. "I keep thinking about his face when he threw the coffee," I said finally, wiping my eyes. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was like he wasn't even there, like I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. Linda nodded understanding. PTSD can do that, especially when it's complicated by toxic family dynamics. Rebecca learned to weaponize his trauma responses, and you became the casualty of that manipulation. But you did something incredible today, Rachel. You broke the cycle. My phone buzzed again. An email from one of my regular clients about their upcoming project. The normalcy of it struck me as almost absurd after everything that had happened. Yet it was also comforting, a reminder that parts of my life had remained untouched by the chaos, waiting for me to reclaim them. "What happens now?" I asked, more to myself than Linda. "Now," she said, standing and walking to the window, "you rebuild. Not the life you had, that's gone, but something new, something that's wholly yours." She turned back to me. "The shelter's rebranding project. Would you be interested in taking on more work with us? We have other initiatives that could use your design skills." The offer represented more than just work. It was a chance to transform my trauma into something meaningful, to help others find their way out of similar situations. I thought about all the times I'd designed logos and websites for other people's dreams while putting my own on hold. "Yes," I said, feeling a spark of excitement beneath the exhaustion. "I'd like that." The next few weeks unfolded like pages in a new chapter. Each morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that weren't fortified with military-grade security film. The simple act of making coffee became a reclamation. No more measuring the grounds with military precision. No more strategic positioning with clear sightlines to all entry points. Just the quiet ritual of brewing a cup and watching the steam rise, unmarred by fear. My first major project for the women's shelter was creating a discreet mobile app that looked like a generic weather application but contained hidden resources for domestic violence survivors. As I worked, I found myself incorporating elements I wished I'd had access to earlier. Panic buttons disguised as weather alerts, resource lists embedded in forecast details, and emergency contacts masked as meteorological stations. "This is brilliant," Linda said during our review meeting, scrolling through the prototype. "You've thought of everything." She paused, studying my face. "The burns are healing well." They were. The angry red marks had faded to pink, and the doctor was optimistic about minimal scarring. But the deeper wounds, the ones that didn't show on the surface, those were taking longer to heal. Sarah kept her promise to update me on Marcus's progress at the VA. He'd been diagnosed with complex PTSD, exacerbated by Rebecca's manipulation and his untreated survivor's guilt from losing his team in Fallujah. The doctors had discovered he'd been self-medicating with prescription stimulants to maintain his hypervigilant state, believing it kept him combat-ready to handle Rebecca's endless crises. "He's doing the work," Sarah assured me during one of our weekly check-ins. "Real therapy, not just the surface compliance he showed before. Rebecca's been banned from visiting. It was a condition of his voluntary admission." I'd received one letter from Marcus, written as part of his therapy. The handwriting was different from his usual military precision. Softer somehow, more human. "I'm starting to understand what I did to us," he wrote. "How I turned our home into a forward operating base and our marriage into a tactical mission. You deserved so much better than a husband who saw threats instead of joy, who turned love into a military operation. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I see it now." Rebecca, unsurprisingly, hadn't gone quietly. She'd made several attempts to contact me, alternating between tearful pleas and veiled threats. The restraining order covered both her and Marcus, but she'd tried creating new social media accounts to reach me. Officer Martinez shut those down quickly, adding cyber harassment to the growing list of documented offenses. My design business began to evolve. Word spread through Linda's network, and soon I was creating websites and materials for other organizations supporting domestic violence survivors. Each project felt like turning another page in my recovery story, transforming my experience into something that could help others find their way to freedom. One morning, about 2 months after leaving, I was working at my desk when a familiar name popped up in my email. Captain James Wilson, Marcus's former commanding officer. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something made me open it. "I heard what happened," he wrote. "I'm sorry I didn't see the signs earlier. Too many. of us come home carrying wars we can't put down, turning our loved ones into casualties of battles they never signed up to fight. Marcus was one of my best, but the man who threw that coffee wasn't the Marine I knew. He told me once that you were his anchor to civilian life. I hope he understands now that anchors aren't meant to drown with the ship. I sat back, letting the words sink in. How many other military spouses were out there, drowning quietly while trying to anchor their partners to civilian life? How many others mistook control for protection, hypervigilance for love? Linda had been right. I was rebuilding something new from the ashes of my old life. The woman who had sat trembling at that kitchen counter, watching coffee drip onto the floor, was becoming someone stronger, someone who could reach back and help others find their way to safety. A year after the coffee incident, I stood in front of a room full of women at a domestic violence survivors conference, sharing my story. The burns on my face had faded to barely noticeable marks, but I didn't try to hide them with makeup anymore. They were part of my story, proof of survival rather than marks of shame. The hardest part, I told the audience, isn't leaving. It's realizing that you need to leave. Understanding that military service, PTSD, trauma, these explain abusive behavior, but don't excuse it. That loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to their unresolved battles. My presentation included the app I'd designed, now being used by women's shelters across the country. The weather icons had become a secret language of survival, helping others find their way to freedom just as Linda and her team had helped me find mine. Marcus was still at the VA, working through his trauma with a new therapy team. Sarah kept me updated, though I'd chosen not to have direct contact. He'd finally confronted Rebecca about her manipulation, recognizing how she'd exploited his trauma to maintain control. Last I heard, she'd moved to California, hopefully to start fresh herself. My design studio had evolved into a full-service agency specializing in nonprofits supporting domestic violence survivors. I'd hired 2 other survivors as designers, turning my kitchen table workspace into a real office. Every project felt like another step in our collective healing journey. Captain Wilson had become an unexpected ally, connecting me with military family support groups who needed our services. "The military teaches us to fight enemies," he said during a project consultation, "but not how to stop seeing enemies everywhere. Your work helps bridge that gap." Linda sat in the back of the conference room, beaming like a proud parent. After my presentation, she hugged me tightly. "Look how far you've come," she whispered, "from hiding burns with makeup to helping others heal." That evening, I returned to my new apartment, a bright, airy space overlooking the city park. No security cameras, no tactical sightlines, no military-grade locks. Just a home filled with the art and colors I loved, the dreams I'd put on hold, and the peace I'd fought so hard to find. On my desk sat a framed copy of the restraining order next to my first design award for the Shelter app. Beside them, a new project brief, a national campaign for military spouse support services. The irony wasn't lost on me, using my experience to help others navigate the complex intersection of love, duty, and self-preservation. As I made my evening coffee, in a ceramic mug painted by one of my shelter clients, I thought about that morning in the kitchen a year ago. The woman who had watched steam rise from her coffee cup, terrified of her husband's anger, felt like a different person now. She hadn't been weak, as I'd once feared. She'd been gathering strength, waiting for the right moment to save herself. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Martinez. "Another successful rescue today. Your app helped her find us." I smiled, raising my coffee mug in a silent toast. This was my new mission, turning trauma into triumph, fear into freedom, and helping others write their own stories of survival. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope. I didn't need military precision to feel secure anymore. I had something stronger, the knowledge that I was not a casualty of someone else's war, but the commander of my own destiny. Every day wasn't perfect, but every day was mine. And that made all the difference. The end.